Hello and welcome back to Stackhouse Knives. Thank you so much for watching this week's video. Today's video is going to be a how to ladder Damascus steel, and it'll be a tutorial video. So I've been asked by a couple of people how to make a tutorial on how to do Damascus steel. Okay, how does this pattern work? So if you think about a ladder, the rungs or the steps or whatever you want to call them, the little horizontal bars on a ladder, that's where the ladder pattern comes from and how it represents. So you've got a billet of steel and you've got these ladders and layers along the pattern. This is a very popular pattern and probably one of the most popular patterns for Damascus steel. What I prefer to do is actually use two colors of plastilina or clay and actually go through a mock version of how to produce this pattern. This is also the way that I go through all of the Damascus steel classes that I teach. So I'm hopefully wanting to give an overview of how the pattern is produced and made so that you can, for yourself, do your own Damascus steel. Okay, let's start with the tutorial. So, yeah, everything in terms of terminology, if I say it's the billet or the steel and it is the stuff I'm playing with, just pretend it's the hot metal. Hopefully I'm going to be having a video while I'm making the plastilina. I'm going to have an on-screen video of how the billet is made, so you can see how the hot steels work in that way of working, and then the softer mock-up is being worked as well. So I've got one color here, white. It's a little bit dirty from the shop dust, so yeah, that's how it is. And I've got some black I'm going to cut, similar dimension. Again, it's quite hard because it's really cold in the workshop. So now why I use black and white is just essentially it represents the two different contrasts of steel in the end result pattern of whatever Damascus you choose to use. So the thing with Damascus steel or pattern welded steel is that you need one contrasting metal to marry up with another contrasting metal. Black and white, black and grey, white and grey, so that you have contrast. And predominantly the black material would be a 1095, a 1084, something that's more of a high carbon, very plain carbon grade steel. And then the plastilina, that is white, would represent the alloy steel that would have a bit more nickel in it, or a bit more chrome, or something that helps resist the acid when you acid etch your Damascus. So I'm going to cut the rectangle of steel into a couple of thin plates around 3 or 4 millimeters, like so. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's see if I can get 5. I don't know how I counted that wrong. Cool, there we go. Okay, so once you've got all your metals prepped, and in the real steel version this takes some time to get everything to the same dimension, and it takes a long time getting every individual face nice and clean. So it's a lot easier with this stuff. So I'm going to take one piece of the black and then one piece of the white and stack it on top of each other. I'm going to continue the process by stacking these guys and alternating the colors. You can see that it's starting to look black, white, black, white. Really nice, again, licorice all sort looking pattern. Black, white, black, white, black, and then white. And a really frequent question I get is, do you have 5 of the same amount, so you have white on the top and then a black one on the top so that the black one welds to the white one, or do you have black and black and then add another piece of metal later on throughout the forge welding process? Personally, I've done it both ways. I really don't find that much of a difference. It will not really matter in the long run. Once you hit around 200 to 300 layers, even 400 layers, you're not really going to see that. Do the metals weld on top of each other? Not as nicely as they, in my experience, not as nicely as a different metal, but there could be all sorts of different factors that can prevent those welds from happening. Okay, so now we've got our stack. The idea is we would tack weld the billet so that it is welded, and we would attach a handle to our billet like so. Once that's attached, we can start putting this guy in the furnace and heating it up. Then the borax would be applied to the surface to prevent oxidization. Now that's the main thing with Damascus steel, is that you want to prevent any forge welding, should I say. You want to prevent the steel from oxidizing, and that's the critical factor. It's the make or break point of when your billet is going to continue being a billet into a knife, or you will have an unsuccessful weld and you can try going into it a bit more. Personally, I just throw the project on the floor and start again, because if it didn't work the first time, it's not going to work. I'm going to have a lot more trouble getting it to work the second time. So we're just going to squash this stuff down now. Enough talk. And this is going to compress those layers. Once we get some compression in those layers, we can start to get a decent layer count. Now, a layer count is so important. When I'm doing the classes on the weekend, I try to get people to remember their layer count. So, like, okay, well, how many pieces of metal did you have? They're like, oh, well, I had 12 pieces. I'm like, brilliant. Take a photo of that on your mobile and remember that number, because that is going to be the only reference point between you knowing how many layers you start with and how many layers you end with. And the layer count is also quite important for patterns, because some patterns respond better to a higher layer count. Some patterns like a low and a high layer count, and other patterns, again, this is all in my opinion, some patterns respond quite poorly to a high layer count. But we're going to try to go for around 100, or just over 100 layers, like I do in my weekend classes, so that you guys can get an exact idea of how things work. So that's the billet drawn out into a nice long bar, and now we want to restack it. So there's a couple of ways of doing this. There's I call it a cold work restack or a hot work restack. The hot work restack you'll see in a lot of History Channel documentaries, and just the essentially hot folding the steel. So the idea is that you measure the center line of the billet. You would cut the back of the steel like this most of the way through, and you'd have like a little bit hanging in there. You would clean the other side just via grinders, or just a scraper to scrape the scale off, and then stack that guy on top like that. So that essentially doubles the layers. So I've gone from 10 layers to 20. That works really well, but in our class we try to go for the more modern approach, because we can get to a higher layer count faster. Now, instead of doing that, we would cut our billet into 4 pieces, like so. And you can also, just for the camera's sake, you can touch the cross section there, so it's black, white, black, white. And you can see how the compression has forced the center of the billet out down more than the outside. The outside's starting to roll around a little bit, so they kind of look like little mini explosions. So yeah, we would restack as a more modern approach. I haven't really cut these very evenly. I'm going to cut this guy off and cut this guy off, and ideally all of the stuff that you cut off, that's waste. You just put it in the bin, or you put it aside, and that's pretty much what you do. Now that I've got my pieces of steel all the same size, cut, cleaned, prepped, all of the above, I will start to layer them, and I'll layer the black layer with the white layer, like that. It'll be a little bit trickier doing it in steel, because the metal appearance of the metal will look the same. And now we have ourselves a nice little tower. So once we've got the tower done, that's gotten me up to 40 layers. So in one forge weld, I've gone from 10 layers to 40 layers. And for the classes that we do, we actually start with 15 layers. So I'm a little under, and I'll probably end up with maybe 120 or 160 layers. Okay, once we go down, we want to forge weld this guy down, squash it all out like that. And once we've squashed it nice and flat into almost a cube, we want to start to work the sides. That gets quite scary because you can pop weld very easily, but we still want to make sure that we can squash that steel out. So it's being drawn out via hammer, manual hammer or machine, whatever you have available to you. It does the same thing, but the machine will be more repetitive and more efficient. Right, now we're at our 40 layer billet, so it's looking pretty groovy. You can see some layers. Now obviously if you went to count those layers, we're not nearly at 40, just for all of those that think they can count every single layer of the steel. I actually find you only get around maybe 10 to 20% of the surface layer count on each side of your knife, and then the other 80%, the other 60% sits inside and makes up the rest of the mass. And you can also see that there's a lot of waste already building up. This is not even including the amount of slag and scale you'll lose from the amount of forge welding and hammering. You lose probably around 10% just in the scaling. You lose about another at least 20 to 25% cutting and grinding, and depending on how many layers you're going with, you lose you easily lose at least 50% of your material just throughout making this stuff. Okay, so we're going to go with restacking, like so, and I might flip that one around. It's not really. And this is what I mean by welding the white to the black. There's like multiple white and black on each surface. I mean, these were sort of dominantly black, but there's lots of other metals included, so that's why I don't think it's too much of a problem at a later stage. Me camera. But yeah, that's looking pretty cool, and you can start to see the patterns going all over the place, which is awesome. Alright, so now we're going to squash this guy down. Now we're at our 120 mark. I'm over the 100 layer quota that I talked about earlier, but that's fine. At least 100 layers is what you want to get to. Right, so now I'm going to start squaring it, and what I'm doing here is I'm pushing down on the top and pushing on the sides to help squeeze, kind of like pressing it, and just getting some nice sharp corners. Now I'll rotate that around and do the same. Just helps, it's a bit quicker. And I can just start laying it on the chopping board here, getting myself some nice flat edges. Now this is where the tricky stuff comes into play. So we've made our billet, done all the forge welds, kept it clean, we've had some success. Now the fun stuff begins. You can already see quite an exciting pattern towards the end of this billet. That's just through cutting and grinding, and the metal rolling over itself, the layers sort of folding over themselves, spilling over the edges. So we're getting some really awesome pattern out of here, and probably a little bit on this side too. But you can pull so much more out of the pattern by texturing it. Now this is where I think this particular process really exceeds. So the way I do it is I'll cut little V's out of the steel. I'll obviously mark them all out and do all of that. I'm not going to mark them this time. I'm just going to cut these V's out like so. And again, this is all waste. It's going into my waste pile. I'd love to do an in-depth video on how much you actually lose. I'd love to get into that. Let me know down in the comment section if you'd be keen on that. Okay, so we've got a couple of tight patterns, and then I've got some that are a little bit more spread out. Nothing wrong with that. This is just a demo. Now, also really important when I get my students to do their patterning, the main risk of doing this is that you don't want to cut so far into your billet on one side of the face that you end up falling short on the other side. So my rule of thumb when I do my classes is I get students to cut 1/4 of the total thickness. Now because the billets are all different thicknesses, I try to do that 1/4, cutting 1/4 of the total thickness into the billet, and then 1/4 on the other side. So you've still got at least 50% to work with, and you've got a bit more body. Because the biggest risk you can do is cutting, I'll show you now, cutting really deep here, that means that you just have to grind on this one, turn it there, and you end up running short. You fall short of material here, so you just run out of material. So I usually would chop that off. Okay, again, waste pile. So once you've got that in order, and this is also one way of doing it, there's another way of doing it as well. So I'll cut the grooves, and then what you want to do is forge that out. So we're going to just slowly forge those guys out like so. And it's also really important that you have a slope, almost like a valley, when you cut into that. You don't want it to be square, you don't want it to look like that. Cut into the face square, because what's going to happen is as you squash the steel back down, you're going to get the corners of the top of your billet to fold in on themselves and cause little cold shuts. Again, it just means more grinding and more hassle. So little V's that come up to the face of the billet is important, so you don't run up into any issues like that. So now I'm just going to squash this guy out like so. And there's our pattern. And what I generally get people to do is just take the slice off to get these little black faces off. So I'm just going to do that now. Just slicing a little bit back. And you obviously want to forge it until those grooves are non-existent in the surface, because if you've got grooves in the knife again, it's going to have to do lots more grinding. So, whoops, that's my pattern on the ladder. Looking pretty groovy. I really like it looking just down here. It looks awesome with those little eyes. But you can see that they represent kind of like a ladder, again, what I was talking about at the start of the video, just laddering like so, and then there's sort of the handles of it. So yeah. Now there's another way of doing this. I kind of call it the crinkle cut chip method, where you we'll just flip the billet over and start from a new face. And what you can do is actually forge the grooves into the steel. So ideally with this process you cut and then forge, or you will forge and then cut the material away. Both will give you a very similar type of patterns. I'm going to use this pencil with a very rounded edge and just start pushing little grooves into my billet. This is going to put the bottom planes down, and then I'm going to cut away the mountains so that everything's on the same level. I'm going to cut, just quickly show you on the camera, you can see those grooves quite clearly. So yeah, and then that's our pattern on with the cuts, which is a bit more random because it depends on how far you cut and obviously how wide and spaced out they are. And this is down to the forging, how evenly you forge them out. Personally, I find it's quicker just to grind the faces and have them all measured out than do them take individual heats from the forge and come through with a tool, unless you've got little toothed dies that press it all together, which I'd love to get. But that'll happen when I get my Coal Iron Works press in a few months. Cross fingers. So now I'm going to slice some of that stuff away, and to the best of my ability, again, whoops, I cut way too much on that side. Alright, yeah, I cut pretty far into the pattern. I actually think I dug into the other side. That's okay. So yeah, you can see that's just another way of doing that pattern. So you've got that ladder pattern there, which is again what most people do, they'll grind it. Then you've got this pattern which has that same idea of the rungs of the ladder. They're only going in a directional fashion along the width. And yeah, so two ways of doing it, and that's just how I like to do it. So even just before you buy the steel that you want to work, get yourself some plasticine, black and white. It doesn't have to be black and white. We had pink for my class, I didn't have white, but get yourself some, play with some patterns and see what you get. This is such a great communicator between the way you're learning how to pattern material and how the steel will actually work. So between those two guys and having the plasticine as your way of communicating, it works really well. Just as a side note, I've had a lot of suggestions from students wanting to change the orientation of their cuts, so they'll put them on little crosses, and that's quite a cool little pattern, and they'll probably put them in like a little arrow fashion as well, or even they'll put them sitting almost in line with the length of the billet. That can give you all sorts of other crazy patterns as well. So hopefully I'll probably put those in another video further on down the track. So if you like this video, smash that like button with a giant hammer. If you're new to the Stackhouse Knives channel and you have not seen any of our other videos, please check out a few more of our videos, and yeah, also put down the post notification button because you'll get notifications on when our next video is out. Not that we've been super consistent lately because we've been really busy, but you'll be notified. And yeah, any questions, let me know. I really hope you found this video educational and informative, and you can just add that to your pool of knowledge and how you work. And as always, you have a wonderful day.